Hello and welcome everybody to this show called Cook and Liberty. This is the first episode, and today with me I have two friends from Belgrade, from Serbia. I have Aleksandar Kokotović, who is a crypto fellow at Consumer Choice Center, which is consumer advocacy group, international consumer advocacy group, and Petar Čekerevac, who is a senior fellow at Atlas Network and executive manager at Libek, which is a Serbian libertarian think tank. So welcome and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here.
First and foremost, this show, as the title suggests, is called Cook and Liberty, and today I'm gonna cook and they're gonna talk about liberty, some liberty anecdotes from their lives, how to spread the liberty movement, how they came into the liberty movement, why it matters to them, something about food, some talk will be about culture. So more or less a laid-back show about liberty and cooking. So before we start, first and foremost, I have to tell you what we have as appetizers for today. I chose not to cook anything, but to do a proper ex-Yugoslavia Balkan sort of appetizers. You will find in Macedonia and again in Serbia, in the Balkans, especially during winter time. So we have like regular pickles, but here we have pickled peppers. And then we have again something that is very important in our culture. Let's say again during winter times, which would be ajvar and lutenica, and we have maliđano and pinjur. So that's what we have here today. The thing is, I cannot tell you how to make that because it's not worth making it. Maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago when labor was so cheap and you would rather do that at home, but now just go to the store and buy something. At least that's my wholehearted suggestion, but I see Petar does not agree with me. He likes it.
I don't know. You can certainly buy a good one at the store, and I actually probably recommend doing so. I don't make my own. My parents don't make their own. So yeah, go ahead and buy it, but make sure it's like, you're probably better off buying a more expensive one. It's not the big price difference, but it can be like a taste difference.
I would agree with this thing. By the way, it's not unhealthy, but it's not healthy at all, because it's like, peppers or with oil and a lot, and it's overcooked and it's tasty, but it's not healthy. It's not unhealthy, but that's more or less. So when you were kids, did you make a lot of ajvar, let's say, when you were growing up?
Did you?
My family didn't. I think that usually what they do that in more southern parts in Serbia. So I'm from the north, and we did a lot of turšija, so the pickled stuff.
Yeah.
That's what my grandma used to do and still does. We didn't make ajvar. I think we had like a ajvar provider. But yeah, as far as ajvar goes, I think homemade is really good. So, but obviously not a lot of people who live like professional lives and have a lot of time to invest in that. I would say if you're buying it, do not try to buy it in a supermarket. Try going to like a small farmer's market, and you're probably gonna be able to try a few different flavors and try a few different ajvars and see which one fits your taste the best. That's what I would do, and that's what we usually do.
I think that's a good strategy. Also, I think my grandparents used to do a little, not maybe ajvar, but like the pickle stuff they did. My parents sometimes, but as a hobby, but like not really. Like we usually go, and even when I was a kid, we would go and buy most of this stuff. And like if you did it like yourself, it was usually mostly like as a hobby, or not really to like have enough for the whole winter or something like that. So I agree with the recommendation. You usually go to a farmer's market. There is a few good brands in supermarkets as well. So yeah, whatever is most convenient, I guess. But certainly, you should try it. Whichever way you obtain it, you should try this stuff. Yeah.
See,
and keep it as an appetizer, because like what I say about supplements, it's not like it will not replace a healthy diet, but it's a good thing as an appetizer to start a meal off, to hang out with friends. Like that's basically a Balkan's tapas kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like ajvar can be eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner.
Yeah,
Like, it works.
Exactly.
It works for pretty much any meal. Even as a snack, you can put it on a bruschetta or on a piece of bread, and it works perfectly fine. So that's what I love about
He's
it.
very Western. He used bruschetta. Macedonian people would strictly go with bread. That's the way. At least in my
Cornbread maybe.
bread, just
Bread,
bread.
okay.
Anything works
Keep
as
it
long as
simple.
it's bread works. That's the basic thing. So I would say that this is a bit different from what I expected, because at least in the late 90s, early 2000s, Macedonia, everybody made. I don't know a single person my age plus minus 5 that was not making anything of the Ivar lieutenants and stuff at home with their parents, because that was the way. I don't know, it was sort of a pride, similar thing to the rakia in Macedonia. People feel so much pride in their own moonshine style of rakia. So you can have with grapes, but you can have with pears, but you can have with pretty much anything. Similar way with Ivar. It was very, very cultural, very important to brag. It gave bragging rights, let's say, at least in Macedonia. I don't know.
But we do consider Macedonia to be more like the capital of Ivar. Like it's made in Serbia, especially like in the South Serbia. But when you think of a place where there's probably most of it, it's probably going to be Macedonia. Like, and then it makes sense that you keep this tradition going like that.
See, if I say that, it's gonna be, we are always saying the good stuff about your country, and you sort of dig yourself into a rabbit hole when you say something like that. So it's nice hearing it from friends from Serbia.
I think you can get good stuff in any country, but I think like if you see the production per capita, it's probably going to be the biggest in Macedonia.
Yeah, for sure. I think we just before this we were looking up Ivar actually on Wikipedia and said there's two different brands of Ivar that are registered. One is like the Serbian Ivar and the second one is the Macedonian Ivar. So I think that makes sense, and I think it's usually southern Serbia and Macedonia are probably the biggest producers of Ivar. Contrary to rakia is made I think all over the Balkans. Pretty much.
And
you
Turkey,
go north, you go south. Similar to what you were saying, it's like everyone wants to make their own. I don't know about Ivar, but that rakia tradition it's still held up, and it's still people even younger than us are kind of willing to go into this process because it's just a fun process. I mean, obviously picking up
once you learn it, once you get the equipment.
It's an extensive process, but there's definitely some fun in it. Obviously, you have to pick up the fruits and everything else, but the day that you cook rakia is a fun time for everyone, not just because of tasting it, but it's also that you need to get up early, you need to go into this place with your friends, and then there's a lot of good atmosphere and good feelings connected to it. So that's why I think rakia is also very important. That's why this is my choice of drink today.
So, but from the general idea about this stuff, what I'm gonna cook today is gonna be sort of meatballs put in red sauce with maybe some sprinkled cheese on top. And afterwards, I call it always the Potzo cake because I learned it of a friend of mine. So I'm gonna continue cooking, and my friends here are gonna start, discussing the big ideas in tech and crypto. So let's start this off with the question on technology. Let's say in the early 20th century, we saw massive improvements. A lot coming from the war as well. We call it be it the airplane, be it the radio, be it the TV. We had new improvements afterwards after the Second World War. Then we had I would say the space race, etc. We went to the moon, but all of a sudden at some point, maybe in the 70s, maybe in the 80s, we sort of stopped with the technological progress. Not in a sense that we don't enhance the quality of the technology, but we don't have massive new technology that changes the world. I would say the internet and the smartphone, the private computer are let's say one big technology if you combine them. But other than that, I don't necessarily see something. Would you agree with this statement? And if so, why haven't we seen such big improvement? Not improvement, a new big technology.
I mean, I would say that what you said, the internet and smartphones and laptops and generally IT. Yeah, if you say like we just combine it, it's one small thing. You can look at it that way. But on the other hand, by the combined effects and the combined outcomes of that technology alone, I think it changed everything for the past 30 years. In the past 30 years. So I think it's even though you can think of it as a small thing compared to the space race, I don't think it actually is on the level of how many what kind of effects it had for people everywhere. The way that it democratized, the way that people can communicate to each other, the way that pretty much anyone with a cell phone or an internet connection can work remotely for a company anywhere. I think the number and the scale of the effects is still to be seen, but the ones that we've had so far have been incredibly powerful. And I would argue that they have been made possibly even more powerful than the space race for the common man. For a regular person, I think they changed way, way, way more than launching rockets to outer space.
Yeah, so I think that you can see it from two different angles. We have certainly had a lot of achievement that's very impactful, that really changed fundamentally the way the world works, oftentimes eradicated disease, oftentimes made many things exponentially orders of magnitude more efficient. But at the same time, we can compare it to what we could have achieved so far and did not. And we know now, and this is something that one of my favorite researchers, Eli Dorado from the Center for Growth and Opportunity, speaks about. He calls it the Great Stagnation, and that in the past 50 to 70 years, we had some sort of a fatigue. So after the World War I, and II, after this big period of crisis, people were focused on rebuilding and doing great things after decades of destruction. And then for a few decades that went on, but then people just kind of got a bit tired of it and kind of turned inwards. And we're still riding this wave in a sense. So there is a lot of impactful achievement, but there is so much more that we could be doing. And the reasons are, I would say, that we are not doing it are probably twofold. One is this ambition that has declined. So we got comfortable in the innovation that we already have, and then kind of stop thinking about doing more. And second is that we have piled up so many regulations that stop people who really want to do great things from doing them. So for example, in the COVID crisis, they basically created the vaccine in like 2 weeks, but it took another year to test it and to deploy it. But it could have taken 20 years if they obeyed all the rules that they had before. So they kind of made the rules easier, made the vaccine happen faster. Airplanes today fly slower on average than 50 years ago. And we still do not have, for 20 years, we have not had like a commercial supersonic flight. We are turning off nuclear reactors instead of building more of the safe nuclear energy and things like that. But there could be, and we have numerous examples. Right now, there is research at Harvard that points to, possibilities for radical extension of a healthy human life. So, imagine living 120 fully healthy years and feeling at 110 like you're 60. That is increasingly becoming possible, but there is regulations and there is a lack of awareness of these great things being built. There is a possibility that we will have, again, supersonic flights for passengers flying from New York to London in 3 hours or so. We can tap into new sources of energy, geothermal and other things like that. So these are things that would exponentially shift the way humans live. They make a lot of things cheaper. We can live longer and happier lives. And these are really radical innovations, but they have not been happening because lack of awareness, a slight lack of ambition, I would say, in our society. We kind of got happy with what we have. And of course, the regulations that have been piling up over decades. But I see this changing because, I think the SpaceX and the space flights are the early signs of this changing. And that in the next few decades, we'll again see, this shift towards thinking big, thinking in centuries, in decades, and things like that.
Before we continue, a brief info on the meatballs, let's say. So basically we have minced meat. It's your choosing what we get, what you do when you do this at home. Some salt and pepper. Here I have grated onion, some cheese, some potatoes, and some
Carrots?
Carrots, yes. In other times you can put the celery as well. It's up to you. All you do is make the meatballs at this point on and put everything inside, mash up, and you pretty much got yourself a meal. It's easy, it's fast, so everybody can do it at home. I understand what you're saying. I think that Tyler Cowen calls this the complacent class pretty much, that we got so rich and so complacent of being rich that we stopped not in innovating per se, but wanting in per se new technology. And at the same time, once you become a very rich economy, it's far more likely to, more rational maybe one might add, to actually go and work instead of be the entrepreneur, because on average you would get more money that way. So considering how much you would risk if you do an entrepreneurship. That's why you would maybe see more entrepreneurial spirit in low-income countries than in high-income countries. So this is, I think, that what we are facing, not necessarily because we are from Macedonia and Serbia, but but the world in general, which might be fearful, but let's then move on. What is the big technology of the, let's say, past 10 years or the next 20 years? Something like that. We can go into the predictions and let's say what's changed your life or the world in general in the past 10 years. What would you say, Peter?
I think that one really radical innovation that we can use right now, I would say, is everything happening in crypto. I would say especially Bitcoin and Ethereum. Because this being from the Balkans, we have a banking system. So you can use bank accounts. Most of the things that you can do with money, you can usually do. But try to send money abroad or receive money from abroad, it's kind of getting more complicated. The banks will get a huge fee. Try to buy stocks. You don't even know how to buy stocks. You have to go talk to a broker, open some accounts. You do not really have a streamlined system for buying stocks, buying gold certificates, buying any sort of, trading futures, commodities, whatever. And even with simple things like sending and receiving money, it's kind of, you get papers, try opening a dollar account in your bank. You're going to get a pile of papers. And then, somebody, creates this Bitcoin thing and it's only one click. And you can send money abroad and receive money from abroad, instantly with a low fee. And you're even okay paying a fee, right? But it happens instantly and you don't have to go to a bank. You don't have to sign papers. You don't have to do any of it. And then with Ethereum, of course, you can also it's the easiest possible way for the people in environments like ours to buy, for example, tokenized gold, like gold certificates. And then, you have a counterparty risk, but you have it anyway. So it's easier, it's just easier. So I think that has got a lot of people integrated into the global financial market. So now being an entrepreneur in Africa, you can easily raise money for whatever you're doing because you can, for example, take Bitcoin. Or, for example, if you want to start diversifying your savings, right now in the Balkans, you have savings, you usually buy an apartment or just, you buy somebody's physical gold or something like that. But now you can diversify. With a few clicks, you're there, and it takes maybe a few hours to learn how to do it. But after that, you're set, and you can learn about, risk management, and you can learn about trading and about finance. And I think millions and probably hundreds of millions of people are learning through these technologies about risk, about finance, about, they're becoming more financially independent and resilient. And I think this is going to continue. So it's we're at the start of a really radical change in the way business is done, transactions are done, in the ways what governments can or cannot do with money. This is a very exciting change. And of course, I'm also excited about the developments in the longevity and lifespan and health span extension. These technologies are slowly advancing, but it takes time to approve them. It takes time to test them. But we already have big improvements, I would say, in the ways we understand the human aging and a lot of disease and how to deal with these things. So I think exciting things are happening. SpaceX is nice, but I am not very knowledgeable about space travel. But that's exciting to watch as well, because it shows you that within a relatively short span of time, you can exponentially increase what can be done in this area. For example, space flights. Now you see that most of the difference between, for example, the number of space flights in the world between different countries is actually made by SpaceX. If the US did not have SpaceX, Chinese would be like a peer force in space flights with NASA. So this is a private company that has revolutionized the ways we fly to space, exponentially decrease the number of flights and what can be done. So we are just at the start of this process, but it's all exciting to watch.
Yeah, I think Peter definitely named the top three, and I think just to add a little bit to the first one, to Bitcoin and crypto, I think that if you look at the Web 2, what Web 2 did is that it allowed for pretty much anyone with, as I said a little bit earlier, anyone with an internet connection to participate in the global economy to an extent, right? So it allowed anyone with, let's say, basic design, graphic design skills to participate and offer their services to anyone on the globe. However, what Web 2 did not allow is for easy transactions between those individuals. It did not allow for people who are based in a country that might have serious banking problems or might be underbanked themselves or do not have access to any of the financial instruments that many people in some, let's say, more developed countries do have to participate in the economy in an equal way. And I think Bitcoin and crypto in general is definitely a game changer on that on that front. And I think what we're going to be seeing in the next, and we're only at the beginning of that. So it's important to know that Bitcoin has been around for 13 years now, 14 almost, 14 now, and it's still extremely. I know this is a thing that people in crypto like to say over and over, but it's very early, and I still think that it's extremely early in the way that we have the technology right now, but there's still so much to be done in terms of how it's actually used by people all over the globe. So we need the front ends. We need people who are able to get this technology into every person's hands, and we already. To an extent, we already have that, and I think what we're seeing with adoption, and specifically with Bitcoin, is that we're seeing it being adopted in places which need it the most. So we're seeing it being adopted in places around Africa and South America, which are either facing serious problems with their economies in terms of inflation, or where individuals do not have easy access to the banking system or access at all in many cases. And what they're doing is that they have the opportunity to get funds or get transactions done in milliseconds, get that money securely without the issues of going to a bank, possibly the transaction being rejected, possibly the transaction being stalled, possibly getting part of their funds lost or taken away from them. And this is an immensely important thing, which changes lives, not just like on the grand scale, but on the scale of like every individual that uses these technologies. So this is what I'm extremely excited about. I see you're preparing something nice for us. Yeah.
Before we continue, I already made the meatballs. If it was not winter, I would have made my own, let's say, tomato sauce, but because it's winter and you cannot get proper tomatoes, so this is a store-bought. I will be frank with you, but it's still a very good one. So all we do next is just put the meatballs inside this pan, put it at 200 degrees in the oven, 20 minutes. Again, more or less, depending on how good is your oven, but more or less 20 minutes. We'll have some side dish with potatoes, and in the meantime, I'm gonna make the sweet stuff for afterwards, the dessert, let's say. With the crypto talk that not necessarily me, but especially the people on the left would argue that only the rich, and we don't say the rich in rich countries, but people from rich countries are allowed to mine the Bitcoin because it's still a, let's say, upfront investment. At the same time, the big problem I would say, again, the left sees in crypto is funding of terrorism. This is even with the right as well, funding of terrorism. You cannot technically control the payment. You don't know who is making the payment. At the same time, the energy problem, because it takes a lot of energy. So what would be, let's say, Coco, your arguments when someone says this?
So there's a lot to unpack there. I think you've mentioned three things. So let's start with an easy one, and I think that one would be funding of terrorism, or just the inability of the state to follow the transactions. I think there's a lot of arguments to be made that is actually not the case. First, cash is still the most widely used, or cash money, fiat money is the most widely used method of both supporting terrorism, both avoiding sanctions for people who are under sanctions. For all these things, fiat money is still the preferred method. We've been seeing this conversation coming up over and over again, and I think at this point we think that there's definitely a lot of information out there. There's a lot of statistics that show that is the case. Bitcoin, on one hand, is a technology that your and every other transaction is stored on chain forever. They're easily traceable. You can very easily find every transaction and be able to to see who made it, or actually how and when that transaction was made. In that regard, I think that the states are they might be cracking down on some of the technologies that we have, on some of the privacy coins that we've had, and we've definitely had some situations that I think were not great and were not handled very well by governments worldwide. But I think that even the regulators at this point are aware of Bitcoin's Bitcoin specifically, and then other cryptos as well, of their capabilities, and they're not primarily used for the purposes that, again, some of the criticizers are mentioning, that they're not primarily used to fund terrorism, and that they're not primarily used for money laundering. And if you take a look at how most of the money is being laundered, that is still through the traditional banking system and through fiat money, and not even by a small margin, by a huge margin. That is still the preferred way of doing it. When it comes to energy, energy is definitely a big topic, and has been a big topic. It's definitely a huge one to discuss. But one thing that I would say is that what we're seeing with proof of work, so Bitcoin mining specifically, is that it's been one of the sectors, or one of the industries that is using most renewable energies globally. So what they're doing is basically most of the large mining facilities at this point are trying to be using renewable technologies to an extent more than pretty much any industry out there. We have some statistics on that for instance, in the United States, it's over 60% of Bitcoin mining is done through renewable technologies. And there's a good argument to be made that many of these large investments in renewables are having a net positive effect, in that they're not only using wind, solar, and hydro for these, but they're also reducing the price for an average consumer. So that means that by those large-scale investments, which are currently being done, in order to provide for more, we've been seeing volcano power being used for mining in El Salvador. By reducing using huge investments to get renewables to be used for Bitcoin mining, we've also been seeing a decrease in price for an average consumer. So that means that it's going to be easier for other industries and for other consumers to be using renewables for other purposes as well, leading to a way more optimized usage of energy, and reducing obviously the carbon footprint and everything else that the criticizers or everyone obviously is concerned about for good reasons.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add, but there is a few things we should also bear in mind. Anything that humans do requires energy, so it depends only whether that energy is used for something useful or it's wasted, right? So with Bitcoin, like, the trade-off is generally okay, like if it does what it does and if it means what it means, meaning sound money or ways to efficiently transact, it's worth spending some energy right on it so that it can work, because it improves lives of many humans around the world, actually virtually everyone. But that aside, you can also say that, and this is true, that there's a lot of, like, the way energy is produced and the grids are structured. Current energy systems, there's a lot of waste of energy happening in them. And Bitcoin doesn't necessarily consume new energy. It can be, you can do mining in a way that it uses excess energy that otherwise would have been wasted. So basically, you do not necessarily produce new emissions. You just use the existing energy that otherwise would be, not used. And third thing is that there are now attempts that there is a possibility that Bitcoin mining can actually make energy production profitable where it otherwise would not be. And there is actually a company called Gridless that's trying to do this in Africa. So for example, imagine having like a small African village or a small town in Africa that doesn't have electricity. But for investors, it's not profitable to invest in, let's say, a hydro plant only for them. So there would be a lot of energy wasted, and the village or town would not be able to consume all of it. But now with Bitcoin mining, miners can come into play and say, all the excess energy we produce, we will use it for Bitcoin mining, we will sell Bitcoin on the market for profit, and therefore, until the town grows to enough to consume enough energy, we'll make you profitable along the way, and then when they start consuming this energy, we can turn off or slow down or something like that. So they're trying to kind of use this to make energy production profitable in areas where it otherwise would not be. So this is an interesting project that's worth looking at. They're just starting, I think, but it's something that I've heard repeatedly, that it is possible that it can make energy production profitable where it otherwise would not be. So you have like towns and villages benefit from it, but you also have Bitcoin production. So it's kind of like a win-win solution. And it can be done with clean energy or dirty energy. Like it doesn't matter, but like with clean energy in particular, like if you use like hydro plants or like wind or solar, yeah.
I had no idea. This is me first time hearing about this, and I think this is revolutionary on another scale, because it taps into what economists call the public good problem, and all of a sudden something, imagine the village, as you said, never would have had energy. All of a sudden a lot of small places can have the necessary energy. Maybe this will even change if adopted on a wide scale. I think this would maybe even change the way we work, the way we live, maybe less congestions in city, who knows. And at the same time, imagine this, a lot of people don't like the congestions in their city. Zoning laws, we always hate the zoning laws, but at the same time, zoning laws are not necessarily done by governments, but by people who don't want new entrance into new buildings. And this can sort of solve that problem, again, long term.
Yeah. And then for example, if this works out, so for example, you have many more places in the world having cheap energy, and then with SpaceX, they have almost free internet. And then with remote work, you have a lot more people moving around looking for a place to live according to their preference. It can totally change the game for a lot of places and a lot of people. So it's interesting to think about it. Like, we will see how it plays out. But
okay, this is again coming very important. Is it only Bitcoin and shitcoin, or do we have a lot of proper coins besides Bitcoin, let's say? What's your take?
Yeah, well, depends. I think that, depends on your use case and how you see it. I see that, when you try to decentralize stuff, it's a spectrum. For some things, you want to rely on something centralized. For some things, you want to go completely decentralized and self-sovereign. So I think that depends on your use case. I think that, Bitcoin is the oldest one that has a very clear use case, very simple technology, and it's doing what it's supposed to do. So it's like the safest play there, and they're trying to build a lot more things on top of it. So we'll see what happens. Like, can you have tokens on Bitcoin? Can you have decentralized finance on Bitcoin, insurance on Bitcoin, mortgages on Bitcoin? We'll see. But also, I would say, you don't want to not of course, not all coins are the same. I would say 99.9% are probably not worth any attention. I support every experiment that people do. I just say be cautious about it. I think Ethereum is definitely useful. Now with their switch to proof of stake, that comes with a certain risk. So they're now kind of parting ways with the way, for example, Bitcoin is mined. They used to both be a proof of work, so you would mine both. Bitcoin sticks to its old tradition of using proof of work because they consider it more robust. Of course, proof of stake is more energy efficient. We will see how it plays out, whether it will get more centralized because of it. That's a debate. But until then, you keep an eye on it. It's a useful service for a lot of people who cannot do, who do not have bank accounts, who do not have, ways, who have intermediaries. If you're, stable coins are still important to a lot of people. And a lot of it is done either on centralized exchanges or like on Ethereum. So we'll see. So my approach is always to respect anyone genuinely trying to build a disruptive, revolutionary, good technology. But there are risks associated with everyone. So Bitcoin is probably the most robust thing you can count on, but I do not think it is the only useful thing. So there is use cases for others as well. It just depends on what your needs are and how robust you want to go.
I'd absolutely agree. I think Bitcoin is freedom money, and it's extremely important, and it's been the one revolutionary thing that I think we've seen in the past couple of decades that I would put special focus on. But it's not the only thing that's important and that's out there. I think, as Peter said, yes, many of the things, and probably 98% or 99% of them, might be a waste of time in terms of the value and the value propositions that they're bringing to the table. But there's definitely so much to be done, and the Ethereum ecosystem and so many of the other ones, the privacy coins, I think even NFTs, which might be for some people like a very relatively, I guess, controversial topic for some reason, will have and already do have a lot of use cases. I think it's not even controversial to say that right now we have a lot of use cases that we're seeing that are speaking to the fact that it's not only Bitcoin and everything else, as you said, a shitcoin. I think there is a lot of those, and I think with any similar to like when we were seeing the Web 2 being developed and just the internet flourishing. Yeah, you have been getting hundreds of websites that have been useless, but that's the process that we have to go through. It's the process that, yes, when people see like a very successful thing, people are going to try and develop their own successful thing that's going to follow, and not all of those are going to be life-changing for someone, but some of those will. And I think that trial and error is what our civilization is really good at, and it's something that it should be continued, and that people should be doing that. And obviously, yes, we need some regulation that is going to curtail the way that obvious scams are done, and there's some that are obvious and maliciously, there's a lot of malicious actors, but I think I would argue that that's the same with any new technology that comes to such a high profile. So absolutely. Yeah, I would say that Bitcoin is extremely important and might be my favorite, but it's not the only one.
Well, we've come to the second part of the episode. Now we are doing, of course, we are doing the dessert. But we are before we do dessert, I have to say we are gonna skip the crypto talk, because now we come to the gloomy stuff with the central bank cryptocurrency, and I don't want to go there. I don't think that they deserve our time, let's say. So, but before we go into the discussion, let me tell you about the Potzo, the Potzo cake. So first and foremost, you need something like this. I don't know how this thing is called, but what you do is you put some butter on it, and then a bit of flour inside. Then behind me I have chocolate and butter getting melted. We are gonna continue with 300 grams of sugar, then with some flour and 8 eggs that will be beat, and we are gonna add everything together and put it in the bowl. And after that we just bake it for 14 minutes, no more, no less, exactly 14 minutes. And you have to enjoy afterwards, and you will, because this is really, really great. And you can also add some vanilla powder as well, but that's up to your choice. You can do some cinnamon as well. It's your choice. So that's what I'm gonna do, and what I'm gonna ask Peter is what I would call the European Union for the poor countries, the Open Balkan. So what is that, and what can you tell us? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it's interesting to name it that way. So for those who do not know what it is, basically the countries in the Balkans that are not in the EU have been waiting for over 20 years to become part of the EU. And they are at different length of this path, right? So some of them are Canadian countries, some of them are, further along the way. Anyway, but the point is that nothing for 20 years, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and like Montenegro and North Macedonia and Kosovo, and they have all been trying to become part of the EU, but they're not. And they do not see, after 20 years, they feel tired, and they feel they're nowhere closer to becoming a EU member, and they feel kind of like second-degree citizens, and that there is a need to do something about it, because people are starting to kind of lose trust and hope in the EU, and they're like, okay, after 20 years, we are nowhere closer. That's one part of the story. The second part of the story is the geopolitical stuff. Now, when we have like the war in Ukraine, there is a pressure on this region, from Russia. West wants stability, Russia not necessarily so, and you have to invent something new for the people in the Balkans to kind of get them together and to have cooperation instead of a conflict. And a regional single market could be that. So basically what happened is that some 4 years ago, president of Serbia, president of North Macedonia, and president of Albania got together, and they're like, let's kick off an initiative for like something that would be like a single market in the region, but they actually started small. They were like, let's remove the borders. We still have borders in the Balkans, and there is, for example, only the fact that the trucks for the logistics have to wait on these borders costs Serbian economy like $350 million a year. And that's probably true for other countries as well, to the proportion of the role of logistics in their economy. But so that's only one example. But we see the region of 18 million people that still has a combined GDP less than Czech Republic. Like it's half of the Czech Republic. So we are without this regional single market, and with all these obstacles that stand in the way of normal way of doing business, is that everybody ends up poorer and we keep stagnating. So kind of connecting the dots, Open Balkan was an attempt to kind of start small and remove border crossings and kind of enable easier commerce between countries. But to make sense, like it doesn't make sense if it's only between these three countries, it would have to involve all of the Balkans. And there is some resistance because some people fear the role of Serbia there. Some people believe still that the European Union is the way. But overall, Open Balkan is a way to kind of make the single market aspect of the EU integration process faster. So you want to create a regional single market and kind of connect it to the EU single market without political integration. So you remove the risk for the EU, you achieve benefits for the Balkans, and then everybody is living in peace and they grow more prosperous over time. That's the general idea of it. Now there is a lot of stuff underneath that.
Do you believe that the Balkan countries will join the EU, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years? Because I think this is really crucial. A lot of people, at least in Macedonia, think that we are only being, dragged down the line, but in talks and everything. But the doors will never be open for EU because we are.
And I think that from the perspective of the Balkans, I think that people in the Balkans do not have a luxury to wait for another 10 years of maybe. And you can blame it on the EU, you can blame it on the Balkans elites. But the fact is, if you're a person living in the Balkans, you probably want more than just a promise for another 10 years. So I think the regional single market, call it Open Balkans, call it the Berlin process, call it the EU, but the regional single market is a chance to have a chance. Without that, we're very close to like another conflict, because you want to make peace and stability profitable. How you do it by connecting these economies together so people can profit from trade, so they can profit from business instead of profiting from kind of, plundering each other. So I think that's like, if we don't have a regional single market, we're in a big problem, because the world is changing and there's like war in Ukraine, there could be another conflict in another place, part of the world, and that all has implications to our region. So I think that, a single market in the region, no matter how you call it, is like the very least we should be doing. And I think that there is voices in Europe that realize this. Like Carl Bildt, for example, said a few years ago, actually I think the 2021, I think, he had this article saying, after 20 years we have not managed to effectively integrate Balkans in the European Union, but at least let's try to economically integrate them in the EU without having the risk of political integration. So I think that even in the EU people are realizing this, and I think that this is the right moment for us to achieve economic benefit for the people in the region, provide stability, and then keep the EU happy as well. So I think it's the chance to have a chance. It's, in my opinion, an initiative worth of endorsing, but over time, we have to see what the capacities of the states in the Balkans are to make it happen, and how it can work in concert with other initiatives, like the EU-sponsored initiatives. So, yeah.
This is what I sort of asked before we started doing this. Is it possible, because we still have unresolved issues between the countries that are part of this project? So will that be like a big problem? Because I don't necessarily, personally at least, I don't necessarily see a solution, but at the same time I don't see a big problem that anything will escalate. So it's gonna be in a limbo. At least that's how I see for the past 20 years, maybe for the next 20 years.
Yeah, maybe that's the case. But if that's our best case scenario, then it's also like not a very good scenario, right? So we should probably strive to have a bigger ambition for the region. But I agree. And then whether a single market is possible if other questions are not resolved, I think in a way it is, because this is how it happened with the EU. You first start connecting like small pieces and kind of, maybe Serbia and Kosovo, or the government in Pristina, cannot agree on the status of Kosovo. But can we agree that trucks can go without delays? And can we agree that if you have a work permit in Kosovo, you can have the same status in Serbia? I think it's possible. And can you have a simplified administration and simplified labor codes? I think it's possible. And also I think it's a good opportunity because of what's happening in the world. EU countries, rich economies, are trying to get production lines and supply chains closer to their borders. So it's like nearshoring. So they want to bring production closer to their borders. In Balkans, you have fairly good, decent infrastructure and the labor force. And then we can actually, by working together as not like Serbia only or Albania only, but like as cluster of Balkans countries with relatively simple rules, we can attract a lot of this nearshoring investment that the EU needs. So we can actually create a lot of jobs, and then you kind of tie. And then I think by integrating on the economic basis, we will make political problems less dangerous and closer to being solvable in the future. So it's like a chance to have a chance.
I like it. I definitely like the idea. I always say it's not that we are special, it's not that we are not special. It's just let's just try first and foremost something like a free trade. Like even the Schengen area. Why shouldn't we just open sort of like you see the Balkan style Schengen area, but for some reason
Scandinavians did it in 1950s with the Nordic Passport Union. So and we're like 70 years late on that. Like it's ridiculous, yeah.
But Scandinavia.
Yeah, I mean, but can we at least be like 30 years late and not like 70? Maybe.
Yeah, that's true. I always say we are not a third world country, but we're 2.5, so we're way behind in pretty much everything. Even the trends, for example, they lack. Besides this, are there any big things that are happening in the Balkans, let's say?
Outside of
on economics, on politics, something that's not in the past 30 years like already seen, already
done. Like
done.
A positive trend that
maybe even negative, but something that's new, let's say.
I would say there has been, at least in Serbia, but probably goes for a few other places. There has been an immense growth of the technology sector, especially like in IT and services. And I speak for Serbia, but you might be able to find examples in other places. And it started actually with outsourcing software development, right? But over time, people made money on that, and they realized that our engineers are high quality and they're not the cheapest anymore, so that Serbia cannot compete on price alone. And then a lot of companies are turning towards creating their own technology products in software, especially. And this has become the biggest, basically, branch of the economy in Serbia. And it has brought foreign investment, foreign knowledge into the country. And it has created a new class of people who have income that's several times higher than average, who have exposure to international business practices. And overall, I think Balkans is becoming more and more also a destination, not only for entrepreneurs, but also for like digital nomads and people traveling and working remotely. So that's a trend I noticed. And now with refugees and dissidents from Russia and Ukraine coming in, we see a lot of that. There is 120,000 people from Russia currently in Serbia, most of them in Belgrade and Novi Sad. There is 40,000 Ukrainians. So it's 160,000 people. That's another city almost of people who have come here, who are usually knowledgeable or artistic, or they have a high degree of political consciousness, and they bring in money, they bring in a different cultural vibe, they start opening things. So there is a lot of these dynamics. We've seen a lot of people in Serbia who come from India on their way Cuba to work here, even Central Asia, I've heard. So these are new trends because on one side, people in Serbia realize they don't have enough employees, especially for types of jobs like construction, deliveries, and things like that. But at the same time, we need this kind of dynamism in the country, because Serbian people go to work to Germany, and then Central Asian people come to work in Serbia. So this is something that's a big trend, I think, over the past few years in Serbia. But it's going to reflect on all the Balkans, because usually when people come to one country, they at least travel and visit another. and then that's how people in their home countries learn about this region. So, and a lot of people in the US have learned about Serbia not only for like sports players, but now also because of our technology sector. So I think that's a trend worth looking at, but we could make it 5x if we are a bit smarter. So yeah.
I was gonna come back to the influx of, let's say, refugees, and at the same time influx of a lot of Russians after the war started. So how would you say the people are reacting, not necessarily to the war, but to the refugees, or however you wanna call them, because at the same time you have an influx of new people in big cities, but at the same time the amount of places that they can rent out is fixed, at least short term. So you see upward trend on prices, and I guess will come political pressure to solve this, because although it brings good economics, but at the same time it brings bad economics for the incumbents. So what's happening, let's say, right now in Belgrade with public opinion? In Belgrade and in Serbia?
I think it's very hard to gauge the public opinion with like any degree of certainty in terms of what's happening with kind of the influx of people coming in. However, there are a few things. So right after the war started, late February 2021, 2022, sorry.
That's Corona talking.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody
so late
was
February 2022 was the first wave, I feel, of people who have left both Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia and have come to Belgrade and Serbia in general. And then the second wave was right after the mobilization was announced in Russia itself, and we have seen two larger chunks of people coming in. I think there's definitely some truth to what you're saying, is that yes, rents have increased, but we have also seen 20,000 new companies being opened in Serbia by these people. We have seen a number of restaurants, clubs, hair salons, events opening up. So we have seen a flourishing of a new cultural scene in Belgrade. And for one thing, I think that it's an extremely exciting time to be in Belgrade, because the city has not been changing at this pace, I think, since the early 2000s. Maybe the early 2000s, when there was a democratic change and when Slobodan Milošević left office or was kicked out of office, was the last time that we have seen this city changing so drastically in such a short time. It has many positive effects. It has some negative effects. But one thing that I would like to kind of mention is that we have been seeing these refugees or political dissidents who have left both Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia are trying, and obviously some of them are trying to make meaningful change in Serbia as well in terms of being active. We have been seeing protests against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have been seeing protests, and there have been, for instance, pro-Putin graffiti that have been constantly graffitied over by some of these folks. And we have been seeing generally, and at least I have witnessed, a number of very, very interesting conversations between the locals, so people who live in Belgrade and its surroundings, and new folks coming in, which I think benefits both. And this sort of exchange of influences and exchange of ideas, in my mind, can only have a net positive both for Belgrade and for Serbia in general. Yes, on the other hand, I completely understand the people who are, and there is sort of a group of people who are suffering in terms of the rents have gone significantly up, especially in the center of Belgrade and in kind of the areas around the city center. Some of these things are going to be obviously an issue for people coming in, where rents are maybe 20, 30, 50% higher than they used to be 2 years ago or 5 years ago. However, the real estate situation in Belgrade is a beast in its own, and we've been seeing huge changes even before this war started with COVID, with even before that. So I don't think that this sole thing, the fact that around 200,000 people in general from in this particular situation came, is the only thing that's going to be influencing the prices of real estate in Belgrade. I think we are going to be seeing prices in real estate probably changing in the next couple of years here, both ways, I think, and it's very, very hard to predict. We might see once the war is over. It's very hard to gauge, and I don't think we have any surveys or any research telling us how many people are planning to stay. Some of them will definitely stay, some of them will definitely leave, but the question is how many will stay and how many will leave. And I think it's really hard to tell at this point. We might see a sellout on the real estate market at some point, but it's really going to depend on how long the war is going to last, what the situation is going to be with new real estate being built in Belgrade. There's tons of factors, and I think it's a very, very complex and complicated market that again is going to be changing for at least some months and years ahead of us. Drastically, at least more so than it did for the past 10 years.
What does this mean for the, let's say, for the liberty movement and for politics in principle? We sort of touched upon, but like, what does this mean for the liberty movement? All the crises that happened in the past years, including the COVID, including the war, again, what we mentioned. So, is the liberty movement existent in Serbia? Is it stronger than before? What's happening right now?
Usually, how strong a movement in the country is should depend, and it usually depends on the people who are in the movement. So you should be resilient to like external changes as much as possible. I think the movement in Serbia is strong in the way that we see now a different generation of leaders emerging, and there is new organizations being built. So when we started with Libek 2008. We wanted to build things that were not there. So we were like, nobody's teaching these ideas. So we wanted to teach them. So we did like educational programs. And then when we were able to do public policy, there was not a strictly free market policy think tank. So we built it. And then there was no media outlet. We built a media outlet. And then we did all that. But now we see people who have been 10 years ago in our training programs, they're starting their own groups. And Ayn Rand Center Europe was started by Isidora, who used to be a participant in our programs and a friend of the movement for a long time. And they're now training thousands of people, not only in Serbia, but in Europe. So things like that are happening, which is always good to see. I think also that in maybe tactical sense, so there are several groups in Serbia, and we have events and conferences. There is a media outlet now. There is economic research. The ideas have become more mainstream, so the government is paying attention to them. Opposition is paying attention to that. My organization has, I think we just counted 141 appearances on mainstream media in like primetime TV shows, interviews, and things like that over the past year. So that's a lot, and that's not counting like reruns and things like that. So that's like a record-breaking year for us. Often in prime time. So there's things like that happening. But like if you speak about the external stuff like the war in Ukraine and Russians and Ukrainians coming in, I think it has exposed the fact that a lot of things that we think we knew about Russia and a lot of Russian propaganda was a scam all the time, the whole time. And you have these people who are giving you a realistic a more realistic picture of Russia and the war and things like that, which is important because a lot of people in Serbia have been overexposed to Russian propaganda because not necessarily because Russia did it, but also it was politically profitable for the local elites to do it. And now that's like, it takes time to change, but I think I've seen one public opinion poll that shows like how people are slowly, like, it has never been like, most people always usually don't care, but the pro-Russian extreme in Serbia was bigger than like the pro-Ukrainian side, right? So now that's kind of shifting. You can see over time that and this can be a variety of factors. Usually it's also like the media and the government has a huge role in it, but we see people shifting perspectives away from being pro-Russian in this war and towards being neutral and more often actually supporting the Ukrainian side. So these are the changes that have been kind of measured. Part of that because of all these conversations that are happening. You have 160,000 people who are talking to a lot of people in Serbia. That's impactful, but also it has become, I would say the government is also like turning away from Russia, and then all the government media, which is most of the media in the country, is also changing their messaging. So people are becoming more neutral or even like sympathetic to the Ukrainian side. And I think this is one thing, for example, because while you can say a lot of things about the Western propaganda and the pro-Western side being, having many flaws, we clearly see a very authoritarian country attacking another country, and you don't want to live under that system, right? And nothing that system will, the interests of Russia in this war are actually contrary to also interests of Serbia. And this is not like a matter of ideology, it is a matter of real politics and how things really work when the country is at war. So I would say that, it has contributed to this shift.
Well, before we continue, this is what the main dish looks like. We on one part we have grated cheese, on the other part just chunks of cheese. It's up to you. You don't necessarily need cheese. We put a bit of potatoes on the side and pretty much it. So while I'm doing that, I would like to ask you, Koko, since you've traveled quite a lot, seen a lot of cultures, what would you say is something that Serbia needs to learn from the liberal West, but from the world in general? And what is something that, if you lived, let's say, in your perfect country, more the country that you love, let's say, outside Serbia, what is something that you would want to bring, be it culture, be it whatever? The rakia.
All right. So I'll start with the last part of the question. What I think Serbia can bring out, and what I would, wherever I move, what I would want from Serbia is kind of this way of living in Serbia. I think Serbs in general, I think this goes for most of the Balkans, are a culture that spends a lot of time enjoying life and having great social connections. I think to have like a good high quality of life, what most of the countries can learn, not just from the Balkans, but I think some of the Latin cultures have this as well, is a good sense of how social connections are made and how social connections after they are established can be grown and can flourish. And I think that's something that Serbs are very, oh, thank you, that was delicious. That's something that Serbs are very, very good at doing, and Balkan people in general, I think some Latin American cultures as well, but I think that's something that I would like to, I guess, transplant to wherever I'd be moving out in the West, if that's the case. What I would love to have from some of those cultures that you mentioned being brought to Serbia, I think is a lot of this mindset of tolerance. And tolerance, I feel, is a kind of a cliche word. I think it means not just kind of tolerating someone else, but kind of being way more open-minded towards ideas of life that are not necessarily the ones that you would be living yourself. So that means that you might not enjoy a certain type of music or culture or whatever, but not being necessarily deeply offended or scandalized by it. I think that's something that first comes to mind. But second, obviously, rule of law would also be great. So there's a lot of things. I think the best outcomes usually come not just from importing something that exists somewhere else and trying to adopt it here, but letting those different ideas mix and kind of create a good thing on their own. And I think that's something that would be good to see.
What would be your...
So yeah, I would agree with the first point that here people put a lot of emphasis on enjoying life and this sort of hedonism that you might be able to see like maybe in places like just other Mediterranean countries. So or like countries from like, let's say, that part of the world where you kind of don't want to only work, but you kind of want to work in order to live and enjoy life. And there is a lot of emphasis put on how you consume your relationships and how you create them. So these experiences are something that's valuable, and it can allow a lot of people, for example, in the West, in the countries where productivity is on the pedestal, it can allow some a window into how you can sometimes relax and maybe zoom out and kind of see things from distance. So I would say that's one thing that this region can share with the world. And also like thinking about, because this region is also like quite troubled and often hit by, catastrophic danger, people learn to be resilient and they're kind of hungry for success. So, people in the West can look at people in the Balkans as having less than them, but wanting to achieve more sometimes. So that would be one. I think what Serbia and the Balkans in general can learn from other places, I would say, learn to be less cynical about things. That's hard, I know, but less cynical, more optimistic, and more confident that you can be successful, you can achieve like a lot of great stuff, and then that you probably also can say that you deserve it, but like without being, cynical about other like the West and other cultures and other things, because we generally as a region lack full experience of these places that we always like to talk about, and also that it just, you don't have to be cynical, like you can be more like optimistic and forward looking and stop finding excuses that it's always somebody stopping you from something, which this region has a lot. It's always the West, the EU, Russia. It's always, Illuminati, and there is also a lot of excuses. So, but you have to realize these are all excuses because you don't know. Like if it's Illuminati, like you will probably know at some point, but no, it's just like nobody trying to do anything and counting on politicians to do something for them. So it's not Illuminati, it's like your local crook that's messing your life.
I am laughing because I have heard this so many times, and when you say this, it's like oh, I'm at the Americans have the Thanksgiving dinner. We have regular sort of family dinners like that with family, and this happens every single time.
I've learned to see all that like as the excuse. We like to talk about it because it makes us feel good, because it makes us feel like there's nothing we can change, so let's enjoy the stagnation in a way. But I think there are excuses, and then there's a lot of people I think kind of trying to challenge that narrative, but we can learn, because if you've been to like different countries, like especially in the West, I would say, less cynical. Like if they have a problem, they kind of sit and try to solve it rationally most of the time. Here, we either get too emotional or very cynical, and then we kind of close into our own like world and just like start, looking at everybody else as trying to harm us, or just they must be scammers if they're successful, or they must be, criminals or crooks, but just like it's not a realistic.
It's always someone else's fault.
Yeah, it's always someone that it comes down to it always being somebody else's fault, and then but. You can say that like if you have totally exhausted your capacity, but nobody actually, if you look at people who complain the most, they're not really trying to like push hard for anything to change, I think. So it's just comfortable to criticize and to be cynical. And of course, some people have a reason to do that, but I don't believe that like most of the population has this.
I think it's part excuse and part it comes down from the lack of social trust. Yeah. I think one thing that I would like to see being increased both in Serbia and the Balkans is social trust. And I can understand the historical reasons why social trust is that low here. It's very low, and it was very low in most of the Eastern Bloc as well. So it's understandable for us as well, given the history and given all of these things. But I think some increase in regular social trust between people would be a very, very beneficial thing for all the countries in the Balkans, more or less.
That's what you mentioned the Nordic countries earlier, and that's what really made them special. One of the main reasons was the social trust. Now I know it comes with sort of, let's say, a very homogeneous population, but social trust plays a big role. And I would say Yugoslavia and even before that, like 5 centuries, we were not an empire, but we were under someone else, some other empire's rules, and that plays a role. But I think it's high time we sort of move forward and at least learn from the mistakes of others and not continue even ours. So before the last question of today, this is the Potzo cake. Basically, you have to wait for this to sort of cool off and then put it in the fridge for about 8 hours. And after that, I would say this is one of the most wonderful desserts you can find. Of course, I have a pre-made cake that we will show later how it looks like after 8 hours being in the fridge. With this, I know that this will get cold and we want to eat. So the last question I would say to both of you: how to find freedom in an unfree world? Coco, what's your take?
You first have to find it inside yourselves, I think. I think freedom comes, and I know this is going to sound like cliche and cheesy, but I think it first comes from within. So in order to be able to be effective and finding freedom in an unfree world for everyone else and changing things, I think it's first very important to find freedom within yourself and being able to function, stay alone, and when you stay alone and when you're in your head, to be able to enjoy that time and to be able to find yourself comfortable in many different situations before being able to find freedom and try to bring freedom to everyone else. Once you do that, there's all of these things that I guess we talked about: enable free trade, use Bitcoin, invest in your own well-being, health, and longevity. Try to protect your privacy. Be vocal about the things that you care about. Those are all good things, but again, first try to find freedom within yourself, and after that, things will follow.
Yeah, you really have to start within yourself. That's an excellent point. And you also need to want it. So when you want it, and then when you find it in a way in yourself and what freedom means to you, you also have to be aware that you cannot achieve it at the expense of others, because everybody gets worse off. If you try to exploit others, then you will be a target for others to exploit you. And I think that's a start. Now, after that, because there's the world part, you really have to understand how the world works. And that also, it means you have to remove yourself from your ego and your prejudices of how things are, and to constantly, research it, and this is a process that actually never ends, because the world changes all the time. But, read books, do whatever, experience the world, and then compare it to your theoretical knowledge, and always try to provide value to other free people so that you can produce something that will give you the means to realize the freedom to achieve it. So I would say that would be the second step. And of course, then kind of try to expand it to others as much as you can. But, you cannot do it before you really want it and understand the world and have the means to do so. You can, but by being a good example or something. And structure your life in the sense that you have to be healthy, you have to have good relationships, friends, family, you have to have income, right? So things like that, and then you constantly try to do that, and I think that would be probably of course, and then there is the tools, the VPNs, Bitcoin, learn how money works, learn how politics work, and then don't listen to fights on Twitter and stuff. There's a lot of noise in the world, so you always have to decide on yourself, and you have to realize that it's your opinion. You take responsibility. I think if you don't take responsibility, you will never be able to really know freedom in the sense, because it's always going to be somebody else's fault, and you will always feel attached to somebody else's decisions, right? If you take responsibility for your mistakes and your success, then it's easier to be free, because you don't blame others. You constantly work to improve yourself. And I understand why a lot of people it's hard for a lot of people, so they don't even try. But if you are looking to find freedom, it's a complicated thing, but you start with small steps, and you work towards it.
Thank you very much for joining me for this first episode of Cook and Liberty. I really did enjoy this. And again, Aleksandar Kokotović and Petar Čekerevac, I would say what we in Macedonia say, na zdravje, and let's eat. With this, we end this episode today, and for our next episode, we will have Isidora Kolar from Ayn Rand Center Europe, and I do challenge you to eat only one piece of this.